Today, we have a parable, one we don't probably know that well. We only hear it once every 3 years, but it does come up like this. And it's the story of this rich man who happens to be a farmer. And oftentimes when we have these parables where Jesus starts talking about rich people, wealthy people, we know the conversation is going to be about greed or about possessions, and that's part of this conversation. But before we go too far, there's two things that come to mind. One is that, in my experience being a priest for some say 30 plus years, I have to say I've not met many rich farmers. I've been in communities where we have farm families, and farming in these more recent generations, more recent decades has been difficult, hasn't it? Maybe you talk to your friends. Farming is not deeply prosperous work. There are not a lot of rich farmers out there. A lot of hard work. People living off the land. And maybe they do it largely because there's the love of their families. Maybe this land has been in their families for generations upon generations. So to me today, this parable is not about rich people, rich farmers, and greed. We'll talk about some of those general topics when they come up in a different gospel parable. There's something else that caught my ear in the midst of reading and praying over these readings this week. And there's a phrase in the gospel parable today, the phrase that says the farmer, with all this bounty to store, realized he had no place to put it. So he thought to himself about building more barns, more silos. He thought to himself. That phrase sounded familiar. Thinking for himself. In our day and time, thinking for ourselves is thought to be a good thing. Being independent, being wise, being enterprising. You bet. In another Lucan parable, a few chapters ahead, 18th chapter, that very same phrasing comes up. It's the story of the Pharisee and the tax collector who go to the temple to pray. The tax collector stands in the back of the temple, and he says, "Oh Lord, have pity on me, I am a sinner." The parable, though, has the Pharisee marching right up to the front of the church, and it's interesting. Luke doesn't say that he prays. Luke, the way he puts it, they'll say the Pharisee thinks to himself, how good it is that I'm not like these other sinners who come here to pray. The Pharisee's not even praying to God. He's kind of thanking himself because he's thinking it through that way. And I guess that kind of gives rise to the question for me today, does the farmer include God in his thinking? Does the farmer know himself well enough to know that he's not only thinking about himself, but is he considering his relationship with God? Where is his relationship with God? With his family, with his neighbors, with the community, with the world? Really, for all the planning, all the thinking that's going on with the farmer, how well does he know himself? He's planning for the bumper crop and what to do with it, but is he thinking about himself and his relationship with God and others? Does he know his need for God? Does he know his place for God, that God has a place in his life? The parable in this today, the farmer is so lost in his planning and his thinking. How's that gospel end today that Deacon Mike proclaimed? Fool, tonight your very soul will be demanded of you. Where will all these earthly goods go? The farmer is too busy taking inventory about what's out on the land and what's in the silos. Is he really taking inventory for the things that really matter in his life? What's going on in his heart? What's going on in his soul? Where are his intentions? Besides, how do you keep inventory of something like that too? What's this parable say for us today, some two millennia later? Maybe in a very, very busy and complicated time, when we have lots of responsibilities that pull on us and tug on us in all kinds of ways, from time to time we need to kind of review the question, where is God in my thinking? Where is God in my life? What place does God have in my life, in your life? How well do you know your life? And how often do you acknowledge your need for God? Be worried if life seems too much about taking inventory. After all, think about the story of the farmer in the parable. While we're busy measuring things that we think are important, are we measuring the things that God likes to measure, the things that God thinks are important too? I mean, in other words, do my words, do your words and actions and desires, do they show how God is active and alive in the choices in your life? And that speaks about how God is at the center of your life. Like the story we heard once in another parable, Jesus talking about it's not cleaning the outside of the cup that's important, the outside of the pots and pans that's important. It's cleaning the inside. It's what comes from inside that matters. It's what comes from inside that lifts up and ennobles or defiles and degrades. Think about the things that are going on in our lives. How well do we know our lives? The farmer was busy with many, many things. With apologies to Martha and Mary from a few weeks ago, the farmer is busy with many, many things. But did he really know himself? He's doing all this planning and all this building. But did he really understand his relationship with God? Hey, thank God we've got time to stop and check our lists and perhaps add a little something along the way.